So tonight is about the power of words. Because I believe that words have power to awaken the soul. And that when we read something, it's not just a mental activity, right? You can read a book, and you can read a book simply from the level of your mental activity, and you can just argue about the ideas and think about the ideas and maybe even change your thinking about something, right? And that's good, that's powerful, that's wonderful. But there are those books that we read, and they go right into us. And they stimulate something so deep, so primitive, so much a part of our spiritual DNA that they awaken us in a way that we didn't even know we had that in us. Have you ever had that experience? Where something happens when you're reading this book and it's no longer like you're reading the book, but it's now telling your soul's story. Right? Because what I believe to be true, what I understand to be, is that encoded in your DNA is not only your physical story, right, and our physical past, but in our DNA is also not only our past, but encoded in our DNA is the infinite potential of our future. Within our DNA is the fingerprint of God, if you will. Because in our DNA is not only all that we have ever been, but all that we could ever be. And so there are those books, when we read them, they profoundly awaken something in us that we didn't even know we had. So for the next 2 weeks, I'm going to talk about books that have changed me, books that have made a difference in my life. And I could literally go week after week after that for a long time, because there's been many more than two, but you got to start, right? And so when you think about your life, what are the books that maybe you've read that when you read them, you knew something more about yourself? You experienced something more about yourself. You felt transformed by the experience. That when you put that book down, you literally were not the same person anymore, because more of you had been poked, awakened, stimulated, brought alive. Because I love that. I mean, I really, as a minister who uses his words, a lot of words, yabba, 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 all the time, I love the fact that words have the ability to go directly into someone's soul and awaken something they didn't even know was there, but that was actually placed in you by God in the beginning, just like a seed. And when all the elements are right, that gets stimulated, it gets poked, it gets activated. And you walk out different. You walk out different. You walk out more awake than you've ever been before. So that's what we're going to do tonight, if it works. So tonight we're going to talk about illusions. And Richard Bach. How many of you have read Illusions? Anybody read Illusions? For me, Illusions was just fabulous. In fact, several years ago, on the 20th anniversary of this book, we had Richard Bach here. We brought him into Symphony Hall, and he was here with his two of his sons. And it was an incredible night to have one of my heroes speaking in Phoenix, because our ministry brought him in, and it was fabulous. So I'm going to read, because for me, good books, they have to tell a story, right? They just have to capture something more than just a manual. They have to really spark our imagination and awaken our soul. So I'm going to read from just the opening section of Illusions. There was a master who came to the earth, born in the holy land of Indiana, raised in the mystical hills east of Fort Wayne. The master learned of the world in the public schools of Indiana, and as he grew, his trade as a mechanic of automobiles. But the master had learnings from other lands and other schools, from other lives that he'd lived, and he remembered these, and he became wise and strong, so that others saw his strength and came for his counsel. The master believed that he had the power to help. We all had the power to help ourselves, and all mankind, as he believed, was it for him. As so others saw his power and came to him and healed their troubles and their many diseases. And the master believed that it was well for many men to think upon themselves as sons of God. And as he believed, it was so. And the shops and the garages that he worked became crowded and jammed with those who sought his learning and his touch. And the streets outside those were filled with people longing just for his shadow to pass before them, that they might be healed and blessed and changed. And it came to pass, because of the crowds, that several foremen and shop managers bid the master to leave his tools and go his way, for it was tightly that the throngs of multitudes that were gathering made it difficult for him to be a mechanic on automobiles. So it was that he went into the countryside, and people followed him, and began to cry, Messiah, worker of miracles. And they believed, and it was so. And if a storm passed as he spoke, not a raindrop touched on the listener's head. And the last of the multitude heard his words as clearly as the first. And no matter the lightning nor thunder in the sky about, and as he spoke to them, always in parables. And he said unto them, unless each of you lives in the power of within each of you lives the power of consent, for health or for sickness, for riches or poverty, for freedom or slavery. It is that we all have control of these things and not one another. And the millman spoke and said, easy words for you, master, for you are guided as we are not, and need not toil as we toil. And the man has to work for his living in this world. And the master answered him and said, once there lived a village of creatures along the bottom of a great crystal river. And the current of the river swept silently over them all, young and old, rich and poor, good and evil, the current doing its own way, knowing only its current self. Each creature in their own manner clung tightly to the twigs and rocks at the bottom of the river, for clinging was their way of life, and resisting the current is what each had learned from birth. But one creature said at last, I'm tired of clinging. And though I cannot see it with my eyes, I trust that the current knows where it's going, and it shall let me go, and let it take me where it will. For clinging I will surely die of boredom. The other creatures laughed and said, fool, let go, and that current you worship will throw you and tumble you and smash you across the rocks, and you will die, but much quicker than of boredom. But the one heeded them not. Taking a breath, he let go, and once was tumbled and smashed by the currents across the rocks. Yet in time, as the creature refused to cling again, the current lifted him free from the bottom, and he was bruised and hurt no more. And the creatures downstream, to who is a stranger, cried, see a miracle, a creature like ourselves, yet he flies. See the Messiah, come to save us all. And the one carried in the current said, I am no more a Messiah than you are. For the river delights to lift us all, if only we dare to let go. For the true work of this voyage, this adventure. But they cried the more, Savior, all the while clinging to the rocks where they had looked beyond, and again he was gone. And the legend of the Savior grew strong. And it came to pass, when he saw the multitude of throngs, that one day, tightly and closely, fiercely they held around him, And they pressed on him to heal them without rest and feed them for all of this and provide miracles for them. And as they pressed and he bent and he went along the hilltops, he said in his heart, infinite radiant is, if it be thy will to let this cup pass from me, let me lay it aside, this impossible task. And I cannot live the life of one other soul, yet there are 10,000 that cry for me for the life. I'm sorry I allowed it all to happen. And if it be thy will, let me go back to my engines and my tools, and let me live as other man. And the voice spoke to him on the hilltop and said, neither male nor female, loud nor soft, the voice infinitely kind, the voice said to him, not my will, but thy will be done. For what is thy will is mine to thee. Go on thy way as other men, and be thou happy on earth. Now hearing this, the master was glad, and gave thanks, and came down from the hilltop, humming a little mechanic song. And when the throngs pressed him with their needs and their woes, beseeching him to heal them, and for all that he'd learned, and to feed them and nonstop, and his understanding of this and that, and to entertain them with the wonders, he smiled upon the multitude and said, I quit. For a moment the multitude was stricken dumb with astonishment. And he said unto them, if a man told God that what he wanted most was to help the suffering of the world, no matter the price to himself, and God answered and told him what he must do, should the man do as he is told? Of course, master, cried the way. It should be his pleasure to suffer the tortures of hell itself, should God ask it. No matter what the tortures, no matter how difficult the task. To honor to be hung, and glory to be nailed to a tree and burned, if that be for the glory of God. But what would you do, the master said, if the God spoke directly to you, to your face, and said, I command you that you be happy in the world as long as you live, what would you do then? And the multitude was silent. Not a voice, not a sound was heard upon the hillside across the valleys, as where they stood. And the master said, in the path of our happiness, we shall each find the learning for which we've chosen for this lifetime. So it is that I've learned this day. Choose to leave now and to walk your own path as you please. And he went his way through the crowd and left them, and he returned to the everyday world of men and machines. That's just the first chapter. So one of the things that I like best about this book is it gives us an image of an enlightened soul that's not 2,000 years old. How many of you learned or heard that there was only one enlightened soul? Anybody? Right? So one of the difficulties of that is if there's only one, guess who's not it? Right? If there's only one, right, and this is the only case, and this is the exception to the rule, then all of us are not it. And for most of us, that's a huge relief, right? Because then it's not me. Then I'm not responsible. Then I don't have to live the glory of God that I knew, because it's already been done. It's only going to be done once, and it was done by him, and now I'm off the hook. But if the message that it's in all of us, it radically changes the game. Because that means there's now 7-point-something billion messengers, mini messiahs, many holy ones, waiting to stand in the truth of who they are. And every great spiritual teacher said it was you. Jesus said, greater works than these will you do because I go to the Father. every great spiritual teacher had a command not to look to them, but to call it forth in yourself. How many of you ever wanted to be saved? Anybody been in a financial predicament, or maybe in a situation at work, or needed tech support on your computer, and right? I mean, all the ways that we want to be saved, you know. Everybody's had a computer crash, right? And you called tech support, and you prayed to God, right, that tech support was going to save you. Nobody else? When I get tech support, I'm on my knees. Right? I mean, I know how to pray, but when it comes to tech support, I get down on my knees because I want them to save me. And if they said, well, Richard, you know, it's in you, I'd be so upset. I would. Like, I'm paying you $60 an hour to tell me it's in me? Right? It's not in me. If it was in me, I wouldn't have a black screen in front of me. It would be making sounds and doing all the things it's supposed to do. It's like, I want somebody to save me. And yet, every great spiritual teacher has taught that it's in you. So one of the things that I love about this book is there's a handbook in this book for messiahs. And in this book, it gives like little spiritual teachings that messiahs need to remember their messiahs, right? And I love it because all these little ones. One of my favorite is argue for your limitations, and sure enough, they're yours. How many of you ever heard that idea, right? Now, when I read this the first time, you know, I was fairly young, right? When I read this the first time, that became a challenge that I wanted to apply to everybody but myself. Have you ever done that? You read a book, you read a really good book, and it's like, you can always hear everybody else arguing for their limitations easier than you can hear yourself. Is that true? And you can hear somebody say, well, are you going to argue for your limitations? And, you know, it's kind of little smart aleck stuff, right? Because it's much harder to say to yourself, so Richard, you want that limitation? Well, no, but that's really a limitation. Like, that's straight up the real deal. All right, so if you believe it, what happens? It's yours. And the more you argue for it, the more you believe it. What if tonight you decided just to write a list of the 3 biggest limitations that you've argued for? Just for grins. Like, you don't have to share it with anybody. I mean, everybody around you knows what you're arguing for, your limitations are anyway, right? It's really just so you could become conscious of it. So if you had to write down your 3 biggest limitations, what would you write down? Like, is it impossible for you to have what you want? Are you too old, too undereducated? What's your story? Right? What's your story? And what if that didn't have to be your story anymore? What if you actually got to activate your spiritual DNA to fully awaken yourself? Now, let me find it. Perspective. Use it or lose it. If you've turned to this page, you've forgotten what's going on around you is not reality. Think about that. Remember where you came from. Remember where you're going. Why you created this mess you got yourself into in the first place. You're going to die a horrible death. Remember, It's all good training, and you'll enjoy it more if you keep the facts in mind. All right. So, right? So it's like, well, that's not a happy thought. So how many of you, like this is the one area where I wish you would have changed in the book, right? Because in the book you need a certain level of drama, right? Because if there's no drama, we kind of get uninterested, right? So in the book, and I'm not going to spoil the ending if you haven't read the book, I would suggest you go, but there's a bit of drama at the end. True? True. Okay, there's a bit of drama, and it has to do with our lead character. Because there's a core belief in most of us that if we fully awaken, it won't be safe. Right? If you look at the life of Jesus, right, the enlightened one, how safe did it look to be Jesus? Right? So one of the key issues, right, that keeps us not fully awakening all that we are is the belief that the world isn't safe for us to be our most magnificent self. And so what we do is we learn to manage how awake we are and who we show it to. Right? And there's also lines in scriptures that say things like, you know, don't throw your pearls before swine. Right? And so we get this place in this mindset that says, I can only be so awake, so godly, so great. And if I go over the line, somebody or a fear that you'll be taken out. And I believe that part of my role in this world is to tell people that's no longer true. That at one point it was true. Spiritually, it was true that if you became too bright, too on fire, too alive, that there would be opposition. Now, I'm not saying there's not going to be a level of opposition to your full enlightenment. It's just not going to have to be violent anymore. Is the Dalai Lama fully awake? Is there violent opposition to the Dalai Lama? No. Now in China, there's political opposition to the Dalai Lama, but it's not personal about him. Nobody's trying to take him out. Thich Nhat Hanh, how many of you know who Thich Nhat Hanh? Right? Now, here's the deal. He's fully enlightened, and he's 100% safe, or was, while he was in this body, because I think he passed, right? Didn't he pass? No. Okay, good. He had a stroke. That's what it was. He had a stroke, right? Yeah, thank you. Right? So, but it's 100% safe. So one of the challenges that I want to give to you tonight is that we have to tell a new story about you being fully awake. And that it's 100% safe for you to be fully awake. And that this really is the golden age of enlightenment. And now the job is to get as many people living the full expression of themselves as possible. Because the more people that awaken, the easier it is for everybody to awaken. Jesus said, if I be lifted up, I draw all people unto me. Your job is to be the fully awakened man or woman of God. Okay? And what I want you to see tonight is there's no limit to how God awakened you get to be. You ready for your homework? Here's your homework tonight. I want you to actually write your story. I want you to write a page or a couple pages or a paragraph or however one of your story of being an enlightened soul. I want you to write what what Joseph Campbell would call a hero's journey. I want you to actually write down your story of how you went from being you to how you went into being a fully awake spiritual man or woman of God. I want you to actually write the story of your awakening. Well, Richard, I don't know how it's going to happen. Well, I actually think you do. Right? You know the obstacles, the challenges, the drama, the thing, everything that you're dealing with right now is the process of you awakening. And I want you to actually write your story. If you were the lead character in Illusions, how you would go about going from where you see yourself, where you've been, and how you would move into an enlightened expression of yourself. And I actually want you to write it down. Now, may some of the details actually change as you live into this. Who cares? Right? But I want you to have a new story. How many of you do you have an old story that you tell often? Right? How many of you have friends and family that are kind of tired of hearing your old story? Right? They've heard it like lots of times, right? Yeah. That's when you had too much to drink in college, and yeah, you ended up in Mexico. Yeah. Yeah, that's what, we like, yeah, let's get over it, right? Move on. Yeah, you were sick. We were all sick. Got it. You almost died. Heard it, right? Oh, that's when your car got stolen. Oh, yeah. Whatever it is, right? We all have old stories, right? And what I want you to see is that you're more committed to the past story than you are the story of your soul. And I absolutely guarantee that the highlight of your soul's journey is not going to be when your car was stolen. Or when you ended up in Mexico, or when you got sick, or any of those details. That wasn't it. The highlight of your soul's journey is when you awaken. And you awaken fully to God. Because we can go through this whole life and just move the details and the drama around and not ever step into the fullness of who we are. And what if tonight you decide to write a story that is the story of your potential, the story of what could be, that really fulfills the reason you came, that doesn't deny your past, but actually uses your path and your past as a spiritual tool to awaken you. I love the part in Illusions where it said he grew up in the Holy Land of Indiana and became a mechanic of automobiles. Because the whole premise is it's every person's story. Man or woman, young or old, no matter who you thought you were, no matter your family's history or story, I want you to write the story of your own enlightenment. And then if it interests you, I actually want you to live into it. Because I guarantee that your soul knows the story of your enlightenment. And you just have to see if it interests you enough to live into it. Okay? Now, I know this is a rather big homework assignment. As my homework assignment goes, this is a bigger one, right? And you might not be able to do this before midnight tonight or tomorrow morning or whatever. You might actually have to decide that this is a project that you're interested in and take a few hours. But I double dog dare you to try it. I do. I want you to write the story of your own enlightenment. and what caused it, what created it, how it lived. I want you to tell the story of who you came to be, not just your history. And see if it doesn't change everything. For I believe that every one of us is the reluctant Messiah. That we've been dodging this bullet from the beginning. We were hoping that somebody else would do it so we didn't have to. Because we knew our Uncle Bernie was going to have a fit if we stepped into it. And we have to do it anyway. So tonight, what if you wrote the story of you? That you were the one that came to save the world. By just being you. Interested? Let's pray. I want you to open your mind, your heart, your soul to the activity of God that is right here, right now. Right here, right now is a room filled with infinite expressions of God. Holy, divine creations. And in all things we look to God, and in all things we give thanks, and so it is. Amen. God bless you all. Have a great night. Thanks for being here.